So wait, you really thought I wasn't going to come back on it? Because once the emotion settles, once the noise dies down, what United did against City, excuse me, I think it deserves proper analysis, not just vibes. I'm recording this, what day is it today? Wednesday morning. Probably go up later today, if not tomorrow. Still buzzing, but for me, that makes it, this one of the most enjoyable United performances in years. But I think what makes this result special isn't just the scoreline, it's how it's done. Because this wasn't a smash and grab, this wasn't chaos, this was control. Without the ball, with structure, discipline, and intent. So I'm a killer myth straight away when I say that possession doesn't equal control. United finished this game with roughly 35% possession, and yet City never looked comfortable, never settled, never imposed themselves. Because Carrick didn't ask United to dominate the ball. He asked them to dominate space, tempo, and decision making. And United defended in a compact 4-4-2. And what I liked was the fact it was a mid block and not a low block, not a passive like retreat. The distances between the lines were tight, the center stayed protected, City were forced wide repeatedly, and central access was denied almost entirely. This meant City had the ball, but they had no rhythm, no penetration, no acceleration, and that for me is game state control. United didn't press constantly, and I think that's the key. It wasn't frantic running, it was situational pressing. The triggers were clear. Backward passes into City centre backs, poor body orientation from Rodri, wide build up when City were boxed near the touchline. And when the trigger hit, United jumped together. The front two engaged, the wide midfielders squeezed, and the pivot stepped up. And then when the trigger wasn't there, they dropped. They reset, they would stay compact, organized. And that discipline is something we just simply haven't seen consistently in over a year. And I think this is where the contrast to the previous regime is stark. Because Carrick prioritized control over athletic chaos. And I say that, and it kind of makes sense when you think about Michael Carrick, the footballer. Casemiro sat deeper, protecting space rather than, chasing the duels. Mainoo operated as a controller, not a runner, and Bruno played with freedom, but always within a clear structure. And I've seen a lot of people talk about, oh, Amram said Bruno and Mainoo couldn't play together. This proves it. This proves they can play together, which is true. I think actually Amram was right. I think when you're playing a double pivot system in front of a three, playing Bruno and Mainoo, I think would have been suicidal. If you're throwing the kitchen sink with 20 minutes to go, yeah, sure, put them together. But this wasn't that. And Mainoo in particular, sensational. And I don't want to make this player FC against manager FC and again the player vindicated, but it was vindication to an extent because this wasn't just a good performance. Mainoo is press resistant. He's calm under pressure and he's intelligent in possession. And what still doesn't get talked about enough and what Saturday exposed was how defensively underrated he is. He reads danger early. He wins duels cleanly. He positions himself to intercept rather than chase. And crucially, he understands his own physical limitations and adapts to them, which for me is football IQ, and it's not something we've seen at this football club with the players we have for quite a while. And for me, it matters because the midfield profile Amram wanted was very different. He wanted runners, second balls, chaos, verticality without control. But I think Klopp's Liverpool is a testament to this. Football isn't won by chaos. The league they won, I think they had 3 or 4 title challenges, right? And the one league they won was when they had control. Not say 2 of those title challenges, granted, was with, because I think it made a big difference when Fabinho was in the side. But Klopp's last year, for example, I put by comparison, and the days before Fabinho came, there's a lot of chaos. And I think in this, Mainoo is about control, control of tempo, space, decision making. And for me, it always feels like low key that when City lose, football kind of wins just because of the money and um, the alleged charges involved, etc. But what I loved about Saturday's performance was it wasn't a smash and grab. We've seen over the years, we've gone to the Etihad and we've stayed compact, low block, and then just hit them on the counter and yeah, got the win. But it wasn't a smash or grab this time. It wasn't variance. City suffered their worst XG defeat like ever. Not against randomness, but against a midfield that dictated the game without the ball as much with it. That's the difference, and that's why this performance mattered, and that's kind of why Mainoo matters, because there has been so much discourse about Mainoo in the last 14 months. I'm seeing people sit here and say, they'll defend the manager blindly. I've seen them go, "Oh, he was never, he's only had one good game in 14 months." Yeah, because the system didn't platform him. I've seen people suggest, "Oh, he was never actually that good." Yeah, he was just a hype youngster who burst onto the scene. And I'm like, what are we talking about here? I've said this already on this channel, on another channel, but I think it's a bit of a joke that we've seen so much discourse and mental gymnastics about Kobbie Mainoo and his ability. But the midfield balance was really good. Bruno, Kobbie, and Casemiro kind of all complement each other nicely. I think one of Carrick's smartest calls was Dorgu as well at left wing, not as a touchline winger, but as a hybrid wide outlet. Out of possession, there was like defensive security, there was aggressive running in transition, and the physical presence against City's right hand side. And on the opposite flank, you had Ahmad, who provided a bit of a contrast, ball security, sharp touches, creativity in pockets. And for me, this asymmetry mattered because United weren't trying to dominate the wide areas. They were trying to escape the pressure and attack space quickly. And when United broke, it broke with numbers, not just one hopeful runner. Every time United went forward, it felt like something could happen. I don't think it's a coincidence. I think Carrick did the right thing as an interim and simplified attacking instructions. And with that, you get role clarity or instruction clarity. Whenever City stepped high, early forward passes, quick switches after regaining possession, sorry. No forced build up for the sake of it. United attacked when the picture was right, not because a system demanded it. And that's why it didn't feel like counter-attacking desperation. It felt like intentional transition football. I haven't even touched on the defense actually. Martinez, I have my own issue with Butt and Scholes' comments and even their reaction to what Martinez said. I don't think there's anything wrong with what Martinez said afterwards. I think it's absolute bollocks that if it was constructive criticism about the way he played or his performances or, his ability, I could understand that. But this was, granted, I get the vibe of you lads sitting in a pub chatting about football and stuff. I kind of understand that. We all do it, and it's a good laugh. Do you know what I mean? But you're in the public eye, and you're supposed to. You're almost in a position where people are expecting supposed constructive criticism, and that wasn't it. That wasn't it. You basically came out and said that Martinez was going to get ragdolled by Haaland, which was lazy in itself because Martinez has kind of had Haaland's number in games in the past. The FA Cup final, 2024. kind of is testament to that. Martinez didn't pocket Haaland because of heroics. He did it because, obviously the midfield shield prevented early service. The block stayed quite narrow. And I think Haaland was forced to receive with a back to goal a lot. And I think sometimes you have that with in other sports where you have big athletes. Obviously they dominate because of their size and their physicality and whatnot. But then sometimes when they play against the smaller, the rattier, the more aggressive players, sometimes it kind of works against them and they can't do it. I'll probably do a video. I might do a video on the Martinez Scholes butt thing and just put United pundits, because I've been running for years that Paul Scholes doesn't actually know football as well as his footballing ability would state. He comes out very moody a lot of the time, but also I find him having lazy analysis a lot. I remember when Ollie was in trouble a few years ago, and Paul Scholes was saying that he would criticize Paul Pogba having doing silly things in midfield and having no defensive discipline. And then for the double pivot in a 4-2-3-1, he said our best midfield was McTominay and Pogba. And I'm like, no, there's not enough defensive discipline there. What are you? The De Ligt analysis when De Ligt signed. It's going on about, Juve sold him, Bayern didn't want him. Why would we want him? Saying that he got replaced by Eric Dyer. And I was like, are you really running a narrative based off Twitter, people having a laugh and rage baiting on Twitter? Are you serious? What are we doing here? Every manager we've had, there's been some time where Paul Scholes has undermined the manager. I remember under Louis, spent 6 months complaining about Louis van Gaal. I'm like, he's the manager. You complain about his style of play, granted, a lot of us did. But a lot of United pundits undermine every manager. I remember when Ten Hag dropped Ronaldo. There's that whole Ronaldo incident with Spurs. The Spurs game, and he comes out and goes, "Yeah, Fergie wouldn't have done that. Sir Alex wouldn't have done that." Why would you bring that up? Sir Alex is just undermining every manager when you bring it up, comparing it to Fergie. Do you know what I mean? And then, don't get me wrong, I love Sir Alex. And, he normally got it spot on with what he was doing. But then 3 months later, when Ten Hag drops Rashford because he's late, they're coming out and going, "Oh, yeah, he was really good to do that. He was really good to do that." Well, which is it then? Which is it? You're coming out here criticizing Martinez for his height, or De Ligt because you don't think he's all that because you didn't watch European football, but you praise Maguire for getting his head down. And I don't have an issue. Maguire got his head down and got working on his football, and he did it fair. But there's just no consistency in what he's saying, and I think the Martinez one just kind of exposed him, and I'm glad the fans are pushing back on it, because Jesus Christ, the way that some fans in the past have taken their word as gospel. I don't care if you're the class of '92 or whatever. Granted, your football career was successful, but it's getting personal now. A lot of the criticism, not just from Scholes and Nicky Butt, we've seen it from Keane, we've seen it from Neville. We saw it from Keane last week. The only United fan, Reese keeps telling me this on the World of Football podcast. He keeps telling me for time that the only person who actually cares about United being successful is Owen Hargreaves, and Owen Hargreaves actually gives detailed analysis. Hargreaves, Danny Higginbottom are probably the two best United related pundits I've seen when they talk about United. Even Jamie Carragher and Thierry Henry, they do it better. And I've been disliking the pundits for a while, but it's getting worse now, because even the response to Martinez's comments, Nicky Butt going, "Grow up, I'm a 50-year-old bloke, this, that." You just you went publicly and criticized him, not constructively either. You just took the piss. And then he responded with his performance, and then he calls you out after the game, and you're being precious about it. Like, let's not take the mick here. Do you know what I mean? You are being just as precious as you're accusing him of. Like, the hypocrisy is quite bad. So I'm going to move on from this. I might do my own video on it, but I just hate that. I hate that you run a podcast. You like, you know, you run a podcast and you're coming out in response to Martinez like it's an episode of Loose Women. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, what are we doing here? Yeah, he responded with his performance. Accept that. It's over. You lost. All right. If you're going to call someone out, maybe you could have called out someone else who has genuinely been poor. Martinez, I'm not going to say he's been excellent since he's come back into the side, but I'm not going to sit here and say he's been one of the worst players either. So I'm very much a case, if you're going to criticize players, you criticize them constructively. You know, we've seen some bad footballers at the football club over the years because, you know, we've had to get players on the cheap, or we've just, we've just misspent lots of money. But I never sat for Wout Weghorst, for example. I never sat there and took the piss out of him as like excuse my language, by the way. If you don't like bad language, excuse me. But you know, like I never said, oh, he's just some lamppost we lump it up to, up top, whatever. No, I'm gonna praise the fact that Ten Hag somehow turned him into a pressing 10 for 6 months to platform Marcus Rashford to get those goals because he was the goal threat at the time. You know, granted, I said some things like the boy can run, but he makes Fellaini look like a prolific goal scorer, which he did. But, you know, we're allowed to criticize as long as it's kind of constructive. Yes, I said that as a joke, and I'm exposing myself as a bit of a hypocrite here, potentially. But the point I was making was he doesn't really score goals, but what he's doing, he's actually doing a lot of the running to platform someone else, the goal threat. So I'm going to move on from this point because I've gone on for it for a bit too long, to be honest. But I look at the rest of the players like Maguire, Casemiro, Shaw, they all benefited from the clarity of role. And I think when players know exactly what's required of them, then the confidence follows. Now, this wasn't emotional chaos. This wasn't passion merchant football. For me, it was defined roles, clear spacing, managed game states, and tactical humility. You know, United didn't try to out Pep. They outmanaged him. And that's why City looked stunned. I do think they were pretty bad as well. You know, they've not been the City of old for the last few weeks anyway. And I think that does come into it a little bit, which is why going into the Arsenal game, I'm not sitting here thinking, right, well, we just dominated City off the park. We can do the same to Arsenal. But I think the nature of the win was very impressive. Now, I don't think United can play like this every week, but I think it proves something that the squad ceiling is far higher than what we're being told. And I think United don't need tactical experiments or even ideological football. I just think we need structure, clarity, and belief. And Carrick gave them that in 3 days. This was one of the most complete United performances in years. I think the only other one that comes close was probably Spurs at home under Ten Hag. But I think this one might have been better because I think Spurs came with the idea of being pragmatic. And I think United were going to have the ball. You were going to be in control. But this wasn't the most complete performance because of possession, XG, or even hype. It was more United controlled the space, tempo, and the game as such. And for the first time in a good while, we say this, it felt like United again. So let me know what you thought. Like, comment, subscribe, hype the video. And yeah, Arsenal next. So see how that one goes.